Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome in to Uncle Jimmy's podcast, brothers and sisters. Now, in the fight for justice, welcome to Uncle Jimmy's podcast, where we shine a blazing light on the unbreakable human spirit, the raw pain of injustice, and the triumphant roar of redemption. Today, we honor a warrior who stared into the abyss of a broken system at just 17 years old, wrongfully ripped from his life, handcuffed for a crime he didn't commit, and locked away for 16 grueling years, yet emerged, not broken, but forged into a force for change. Jeffrey Deskovic, exoneree, attorney, and relentless advocate, joins us to share his story of resilience, faith, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. Jeffrey, your journey from the shadows of wrongful conviction to the forefront of criminal justice reform is nothing short of inspirational, a testament that one voice, amplified by courage, can topple mountains of wrong. Thank you for being here, brother. How you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you very much for having me on.
I'm so excited. So, Jeffrey, as we sit here, right, in this sacred space of storytelling and healing, take us back to that fateful night in 1989 in Peekskill, New York. Paint the picture. It was the high school world was shattered when your classmate, Angela Carrera, was brutally raped and murdered. A tragedy that sent shockwaves through your community, leading to a coerced confession, ignored DNA evidence, and a conviction that stole your youth. We're going to walk through the darkness, the interrogation room pressures, and how it ignited a fire in you that still burns today for the wrongfully accused souls out there. Jeffrey, at 17, right, facing that interrogation, what gave you the strength to proclaim innocence from day one?
But I was arrested at 16. I was
16.
I was convicted when I was 17. So you are right. The number 17 is a key role.
Yep.
Going back to 1989, November 15th, 1989, my classmate, Angela Correa, classmate in high school. I barely knew her. She was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name. She knew mine. That was really the extent of it. We weren't even really on a high-by basis. So she left school, went home with her sister. Her sister went to the restroom. Angela decided not to wait for her. She left on her own, went to a park in order to take some pictures with her camera for her photography class. There was a male student that's assigned to her like a buddy system. The male student played hooky on the assignment. Angela found herself in a wooded area, a path which connected a unrelated school and condominiums, where she unfortunately came across a 29-year-old drug addict who was high, who attacked, murdered, and raped her. So her body was found 3 days later, found naked from the waist down. There really hadn't been a murder like that in Peekskill in a very long time. So it understandably, as you correctly point out, it caused shockwaves. There were rumors. Parents were concerned with their own safety, safety of their children. The city basically shut down. Parents were driving their kids to school, picking them up right after that. There were town hall meetings, safety tips were given, updates on the investigation were given. I got on the police radar because in high school I was quiet. I was to myself. I didn't participate in a lot of organized sports, and therefore I didn't quite fit in. The kids were in my grade were like a year older than me because I had skipped the first grade. So I really wasn't into drinking and parties and chasing girls, and really wasn't familiar socially with those kids. That was not my peer group that I used to play with after school in the apartment complex that I lived in. Therefore, I was on the fringe of the society, and when the police interviewed students from the high school, some of them told the police, "Well, you might want to talk to Jeff because he's doesn't quite fit in." I guess their thinking was that people who are strange and quiet commit heinous crimes. A secondary factor was that I was a sensitive teenager. This was my first brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction to it. And the police thought that my
Sorry about
reaction, it's okay. The police thought that my emotional reaction was disproportionate to what my actual relationship with the victim was. So emotion as a indication of guilt, right, was what went through their mind, right, to hear them tell it. They got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the perpetrator. I had the misfortune of matching that. So it was a reinforcing factor. So for about 6 weeks, they played this cat and mouse game with me. Half the time they talked to me as a suspect. And when they pushed too hard, I'd want to get away from them. They switch it up. Jeff as this junior detective helper theme was developed, which I was susceptible to because prior to being a teenager, I dreamed of being a cop when I grew up. And then I was 16.
Yeah.
They did the good cop, bad cop routine which again I was susceptible to because my father had never been in my life in any aspect. I never met him, and in time I began to look to the good cop as a father figure.
Yeah.
So
And Jeff, how long did you say this was going on for? This interrogation was back and forth?
this went on for 6 weeks.
Okay. So they're bringing you in and out of the precinct, or you're
Yes.
going down, for 6 weeks.
Right. They're bringing me in and out of the precincts. My mother has no idea that any of this is going on. By the way, and I suppose I made it worse because I was 16 years old, and that really is the age 16 and 17 when kids start to rebel against authority. They want their own independence, and of course, we're smarter than our parents, right?
Yeah.
Except that we're not, but we
We're
think
not
so.
exactly.
Except that we think we are in the moment. So that's how I fell victim to that. So eventually, they said, "Look, Jeff, we got some new information in the file. We want to share that with you. That's going to allow you to be even more helpful to us. First, though, you have to take and pass this polygraph test, the lie detector." So the next day, instead of going to the high school, I went to the station for the test because it was a school day. My mother and grandmother thought I was in school, no idea that anything was wrong. Therefore, they didn't call around looking for me. And I had heard through the rumor mill that other people had been polygraphed at the Peekskill police station. So this is where I was expecting this polygraph to take place at. And so far as I was concerned, I was doing this as a way of helping the police, not so that they could polygraph me, and Jeff as a suspect.
And Jeff is a suspect. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. But instead of doing the
And those are admissible in court, correct? Polygraph
polygraph,
test?
no, the polygraph is not admissible in court, but statements that people make while they're on in the polygraph are. I'm going to come
Okay.
back
So they
to that.
can use that against you, certain questions and all
Yes.
that.
The
And your
question, the
answer.
dialogue is just not the polygraph test results.
You know what, Jeff? I've never even thought of that. I always thought that, hey, you know what? That's another tactic that the law enforcement uses. Hey, this can't be used in court, but your answers can be.
Correct. Yes, that's a very good point. Not no other host has made that point, by the way, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that you brought that out. So the next day, I went to the police station for the test, but instead of giving me the test in Peekskill, they drove me across county lines, 40 minutes away by car from Peekskill, which is in Westchester County, New York. It's the suburbs. They drive me 40 minutes away across county lines to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County. So that means that since I don't know where I am and I have no money, I have no independent means of escape. So I'm
Yeah.
totally dependent upon the police. They continued their game by putting me in the car by myself with the good cop while the bad cop and lieutenant's in a different vehicle. The polygraphist was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he's dressed like a civilian. He never identifies himself as law enforcement, never reads me my rights. So he gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but I didn't understand it because it had a lot of big words in it.
Yeah.
But I figured I'm there to help the police. What does it matter? Let's just
Yeah.
get on with it. And from there, he put me in a small room. He gave me countless cups of coffee to get me nervous. Pretty clear in hindsight, the purpose of that was to wire me up so I'd be more susceptible to interrogation and to jimmy the polygraph test results, though they're
Result.
not accurate anyway. He he literally after he wires me up metaphorically with a coffee. He then literally wires me up to the polygraph, and then he launches into his third-degree tactics. So he invades my personal space. He raises his voice at me. He keeps asking me same questions over and over again. And as each hour passes, my fear increases in proportion to the time. I'm going to share my background, which I'm really not used to talking with adult male figures because of the absence of my dad and extremely sporadic interaction, infrequent with my uncle. So this is a new thing entirely, much less to be with a adult male that's
Male.
as ferocious as he is in the moment. So he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours.
Wow.
Towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." And that really shot my fear through the roof. At that point, the cop comes in the room who had been pretending to be my friend, and he says, "Look, they're going to harm you. I've been holding them off. I can't do that any longer. You got to help yourself. Listen, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested." Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, I was in fear of my life because the fact that I didn't know where I was and no one else did loomed rather large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. There was this push pull dynamic, the possibility of harm and
Yeah.
this false life preserver that he threw me. And so I made a decision to make up a story based on the information they gave me that day and the 6 weeks run up to it. By the time it was said and done, I had collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. The interrogation was not videotaped. There was no audio tape, no signed confession, just the cop's word for it. Obviously, I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and a rape.
So you're arrested at that point, right at that point
Correct.
in the station.
Right.
You're 16, you said at the time?
I'm 16 at the
So
time.
you're
Yes.
16 at the time, you go into Peekskill and they bring you 40 minutes down. Like you said, they wire you up with coffee, they get you going. The cop comes in, he's invading your space, he's giving you every friggin', bully tactic that there is. And to the point where, the good cop comes in, like you said, you're not used to, the male support, right? The male support, the male, person you look up to. So, he says you got to help yourself, kid, but the one thing that sticks in my mind is he tells you you can go home. You're going to be able to go home, you know?
Right. Yeah,
And
he makes that
obviously that
false
don't happen.
promise. He makes that false promise, and then again, for him to mention, "Well, they're gonna harm you," that's a threat also.
That's
That
the
that
threat.
that's
Yeah.
that's illegal as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Jeff, do you remember where you were the night that the crime happened?
Well, the crime, according to the medical examiner, the crime happened in the afternoon at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, and yes, I
Okay.
do. I was playing wiffle ball with one of my friends, which I told the police that, and I told my lawyer that. But
There
my
you go.
lawyer never interviewed the witness, never called him at the trial. So speaking of which, let me share this. You mentioned at the beginning of the show, very important point, that the DNA excluded me. So
Yeah.
after I'd been arrested, the results of a DNA test came in from the FBI lab, and it showed that seminal fluid found near the victim, I mean in the victim, didn't match me. But instead
Yeah.
of acknowledging they made a mistake, they kept prosecuting. To get around the DNA, the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, to commit perjury. So when there's an autopsy done, they take written notes, they take audio notes, with a recorder as they're making their findings. So in my case, it's only 6 months after doing this autopsy, hundreds of autopsies later, once the DNA doesn't match me, he suddenly says, try to follow this now. This is going to be tricky. He says he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence that he claims showed that the victim was sexually active, which is what opened the door for the prosecutor to argue, aha, that is how the DNA doesn't match Deskovic, and yet he's still guilty. She was sleeping around. In fact, she must have slept with somebody just before you murdered and raped her. And then taking it a step further, he mentioned another youth by name that he claimed slept with the victim, but he never tried to prove it. He never got a DNA sample from this other youth, never even got him to take the witness stand and say that verbally. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. But my lawyer didn't defend me.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Jeff. So my thing is, right, you said that they, when you were in court, one of the things they said is that she had, she had sex with somebody before you killed her, right? Does when they find her, you said they have her pants are down, right?
Yes.
So as a cop, right, the first thing you would think is, hey, we have a sexual assault there, right? Not that, hey, and it comes back, the DNA is obviously not yours because you were playing wiffle ball with your friend. And so who is at the time, right? Who's the prosecutor?
The prosecutor's name is George Bolin. Considered to be the top trial prosecutor in the Westchester DA office at the time.
Okay. And your lawyer's
Right,
he's
I have a
just
public
sitting back,
defender.
huh?
I have a public defender, right, who essentially didn't defend me. Here's how he failed me. He rarely met with me. When he would meet with me and I try to explain to him I'm innocent, what happened in the interrogation room, he's always shutting me up. Okay. He never explains to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never uses that to argue that proves the confession's coerced and false. He literally doesn't cross-examine the medical examiner. He says in open court, "You're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you." Doesn't present my alibi. And then in terms of the confession, when you defend the case as a false confession, you have to answer that confession. You got to explain it. You got to disprove it, bring it all together in your closing argument, or your
Yeah.
client runs a substantial risk of being wrongfully convicted. But he didn't do that. Sometimes he argued to the jury the confession never happened at all. Other times he argued that it was a false confession. At still other times he was simply arguing it was coerced. So by taking an approach of just throwing mud against the wall. He had to have been standing there at the end, with no credibility. Lastly, he shouldn't have represented me because of a conflict of interest. This other youth that they were falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender office. So that conflict prevented us from asking him to give a DNA sample. It prevented the defense from calling him as a witness to explode the whole consensual sex theory.
Yeah. So Jeff, so
But
you're sitting there, right? You're sitting there. The case goes on. You just said it. Your lawyer basically, throws this, throws that, throws everything at the wall, and doesn't have the solid, case that you're trying to tell him that you have, right? You have your
correct.
alibi. He doesn't call the alibi witness,
I
so he
wanted
drops
to
the ball.
testify. I want to testify and mention because the cops left the threat and false promise out of their story. So I
Okay,
wanted to testify so that those facts could be considered, but he wouldn't let me do that.
he wouldn't
But
put you
there's
on the
two
stand.
other irregularities that happened that were factors in my wrongful conviction. One of them is that while the polygraph results are not admissible, we covered that before, but the
Yeah.
the only way the results themselves would be admissible would be if both sides agree. We
Okay.
didn't agree, but the judge said, well, the statements happened while you were polygraphed. So he allowed the polygraphers to repeatedly tell the jury that I lied when I denied committing the crime, but banned my lawyer from asking him any questions as to how he arrived at his opinion. Could you imagine the prejudicial impact on the jury as far as that?
It's crazy. So you get
Then,
to you get
good.
to the point, right, Jeff? So they basically go through with the case. When it goes to the jury, right? What's
Yes.
your feeling? How are you feeling? Do you
I
know
was
they go
feeling
away
confident. I mean, in
because you
time, I
didn't do it?
came to believe I didn't do it, right? And I came to believe I'd be found not guilty because that's what my mother is telling me. My extended family is they're telling me that also. So I
Yeah.
come to believe that. There was a brief moment for the defense on the third day during the jury deliberation. They asked to see the victim's bra, which had been entered as evidence by the prosecution.
Yeah.
That was important because that intersected with one of the statements that they coerced out of me, in which I said that I ripped her bra off. But it was at that moment. But there's some bras, the way that they're made, you can't rip it off of. You can't. So
Yeah.
when they asked to see it, that was a bright spot. But that's when the judge said, well, the bra and other clothes were left in the courtroom over the weekend. And apparently the janitors, they thought it was garbage. So they threw it out and it's not available anymore.
Jesus.
And lastly, on the third day, the jury sent out a note because we're in December now, and the jury sent out a note. Well, look, if we can't come up with a verdict, are we going to be kept sequestered over the Christmas holiday? And the judge told them yes. And so I learned many years later that at the point of the note, it was 11-1 for a conviction, but there was a holdout juror, but they were all pressing him. And then when that note came, the answer to that note came back, that ratcheted the pressure up. And so he switched his vote. Nobody wanted to be there over the Christmas holiday, so he switched his vote, and I was wrongfully convicted, given a 15 to life sentence because I've been charged as an adult, and I was sent to a men's maximum security prison.
Okay. So when you're sentenced, right? You're sitting there. And when they find you guilty, right? What's going through your head at that point?
My mind was spinning
You're
because up to
17
that
years
point in
old.
time, I'm 17 years old. Up to that point, I thought only guilty people were convicted. So
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
a combination of shocked. It felt surreal, and quite frankly, I wondered, well, what the hell's going to happen to me now? I've just been convicted of a murder and rape.
So Jeff, do you when they're taking you away, right? When you're found guilty, are you kicking and screaming, telling them you didn't do it, or are you just resigned to your fate? Like at that point, like, hey, they found me guilty. Like shit.
I was neither one. Not full. I was shell shocked. I was shell shocked.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you're innocent, and you told your lawyer, you put it in the hands of the jury. They find you guilty, and then all of a sudden, here you are, 17-year-old kid, now getting hit with 15 to life. So, how did the reality of a life sentence hit you that first night you were in prison?
Well, when I was in the cell, and I see all the visual cues. You see the prison wall, the cell bars, the way that the cell is, and barbed wire all over the place. And I think it really hit me my first night when I got to Elmira. Past the county jail, past the reception,
Yeah,
went through that, and then got to the actual permanent facility, which they call it, and they're processing me there. And one of the guards asked me, "Do you want to sign into protective custody?" And I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, you might, you might feel like your life is in danger because you've been convicted of a rape with the murder. There's a vigilante mentality towards people convicted of sex offenses, and you're 17 years old. We really can't protect you. We can react when something happens, but the damage is done. If you want, we can put you in protective custody and therefore guarantee your safety." And
Yeah.
so I asked, "Well, what would that actually look like?" And they said, "Well, you would be kept in your cell 23 hours a day. You come out 1 hour a day for recreation by yourself, use the phone, shower, you know, watch TV. You wouldn't be
Yeah.
allowed to go to recreation or to any type of educational programs." And so I quickly thought, and the point I'm mentioning this story is that's when it really hit me where I was. So I had to make a really quick decision. And I thought to myself, this is crazy. I really can't believe that I'm fully here. Okay, despite what my senses are telling me, but yet he just said what he did. I mean, this is bad enough as it is. I am not going to make it worse by agreeing to go into protective custody where I'm going to be in my cell the whole time. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go to general population and take my chances. And if somebody kills me, well, I guess I don't have to worry about finishing the rest of that life sentence anymore.
Yeah, and that's to me, right? So, you're not guilty. And all of a sudden, I don't know if it's a point of where they're playing games with you, trying to have you go into PC, or they're just really looking out for you. Because to me, it's more of those like, hey, if I sign myself into PC, right? To me, it'd be like this is me almost admitting that I did it. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
sure. Of course. Yeah, of course. Yes,
You know?
I agree with that. Yes, I definitely agree with that interpretation. Sure.
So what are some of the biggest things, right? So you're in jail, you get the
We're recording. Can you give me just 1 second? I need to plug the power thing in so I
yeah,
don't.
yeah, do your thing, brother. Yeah. All right, brother.
Okay, I'm back.
So Jeff, what was some of the hottest moments behind bars and what kept your hope alive? Was it the hope that you were innocent?
Yes, it was the hope that I was innocent. Sure. I ignored the 15 to life sentence and I just thought, I just have to hold on for a year or two to the next appeal, which I was
Okay.
sure I was going to win because I'm innocent and I still naively believed in the system.
In the
So
system, yeah.
I lost 7 appeals. So that got me through 11 years. So that was
Wow, you
part of it.
lost 7 appeals.
I had 7 appeals, and then when that happened, when that was over, my appeals were finished. Then the only way back into court when that happens is if you could find some new evidence. So I wrote letters for 4 years. So my hope was attached to those letters, and
Okay,
then I
so let's
began.
just let's
Go ahead.
just circle back right to the so you
Yes,
you you seven appeals, right? So I
yes,
never knew this. So you can exhaust your appeals.
yes,
So
yes. They
seven
don't
is the
allow.
most
Meaning
that you
they
can
don't
do.
allow you. They don't allow you. You don't have an unlimited number of appeals.
And that's crazy. You think in America, right, where we're supposed to be the greatest country in the world, justice, right, is supposed to be served, and you're limited to your appeals. Here is an innocent man, Jeff, sitting in prison, and they tell you did your seventh appeal, you lost, now you're stuck. You're stuck in jail, right? As an
Correct.
innocent man.
Yes.
It's absolutely crazy. So you said you started a writing campaign, right? Who were you writing to at that point?
I was writing to lawyers and nonprofit organizations that work to free wrongfully convicted people. I wrote churches and faith-based organizations. My rationale is, well, maybe there's a lawyer or investigator in the congregation that could be prevailed upon to take my case. If I could come up with an action that somebody could do that would
Yeah.
could set in motion a chain of events that culminated into my ultimately getting the legal representation that I needed, then I wrote the letter. I wrote anyone and everyone I could think of.
Yeah.
All
Now,
right.
does anybody get back to you?
No, other than the occasional no, and of course the people that said no, some of them even let me know how much money they wanted. Should I somehow be able to scrape it together?
Yeah, 16-year-old, at the time of this, 16, then you turn 17, you're going away to, you're in jail, 15 to life, and now they're asking you for money. So it's crazy, right? So when you're in there, right, Jeff, how did faith or spirituality sustain you throughout those years?
Belief in God was another important factor. Without that, I definitely would have committed suicide without a doubt. So belief in God was a key. Another thing was I made use of my time. I took whatever educational or vocational classes they had. I did that. I studied the law, and that gave me a sense of comfort. I used to collect articles about other people who were exonerated, and I'd use that as motivation. But I would also study like who helped them, what route did they take,
Yeah.
usage of euphemisms. No, it's not the prison warden, it's the superintendent. It's not the correction. It's not the prison guards. It's the correction officers. It's not my prison assignment in the morning and my prison assignment in the afternoon. I'm going to school. I'm going to work. When they allowed us to purchase televisions for in-cell use, for the most part, my TV stayed off because I was studying law, writing letters, and reading nonfiction books. But
Yeah.
I did nonetheless have certain programs that I watched weekly. And since I was rarely getting visits, I pretended that the people that I was watching on the weekly programs, that they were my friends. So the usage of delusion, that I'm visiting with friends, and or if I would
Friends.
play sports, I'd play basketball, ping pong. So I would make pretend that I was a professional player, so would the other people. But it wasn't like kids fooling around on a playground. This was that my mind needed to leave the prison
You
for
needed
for
that
a couple of
escape.
hours, and so delusion as a means of that. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, despite all those things, I still had to fight off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up, suicidal ideation. I think that the most difficult time for me, so I'll let you and ultimately the listeners pick. Okay, theater of the absurd here for a second. Okay, is it when I went to the parole board and got denied largely because I maintained my innocence? So now my appeals are over. 4 years worth of letter writing has yielded nothing, and even the parole board has slammed the door shut. So is it then during that last year where I nearly buckled, and I was thinking of quitting and suicide on a regular basis, to the point that I was asking this pen pal that I didn't know from a can of paint. I placed the ad in the paper, just desperate for outside contact, but also hoping that I could convince someone of my innocence and they could help build that bridge that I needed to the legal help. I was out asking a stranger, should I just quit, do suicide? So was it that moment, or is it instead during my one and only trip to the box, the special housing unit, solitary, where I'm there because I defended myself, albeit proactively, against people that are threatening me. I'm convinced by my jail smarts at this point, they're coming to kill me. They're coming to stab me. Let me not say kill. They're coming to stab me. And it's
Yeah.
not clear to me how many of them it's going to be, or at one-on-one or whatever. It's dangerous enough. Okay. So I'm doing that. Okay. I have a conscience. So I don't try to really hurt somebody. So I really don't hit them hard enough, but they have no such restraint on me. And I get hit multiple times on the side of my head with a 10-pound weight plate, having to go to the outside hospital. And while in the special housing unit, following that with that kind of injury, where I'm supposed to be in a prison hospital, but I'm in the box because the guards are indifferent and or incompetent. And while there, I get the word that I've lost one of my appeals. I've lost in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information on the filing procedure, as a result of which my petition arrived 4 days too late, which the court at the then Westchester DA's urging, it was Janine Pirro, her office urged the court, just rule he's late and dismiss his case. And that's
Wow.
what they did. So it's hard to say which of the two were the worst moment.
That's tough. That's tough. So, Jeff, what books or stories became your lifeline during prison time?
Yeah. Beyond articles of, well, did read a book called Actual Innocence, Bereshek and Peter Neufeld, and it had accounts of other wrongful conviction cases that culminated into wrongful conviction. I read some political books. I remember I read the book called The Ambition and the Power, The Fall of Jim Wright. And so I
Yeah.
kind of got the political bug that way, and I started reading books on presidential history. I read self help books and relationship books. So, like, I read the book How to Be an Adult in Relationships by David Richow.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Leo Buscaglia, who talked a lot about men being in touch with their feelings and being in loving relationships. And my theory was, if I somehow find myself out of prison,
Yeah.
I would like to find a romantic partner. I'm not going to have experience from, my teenage years. So maybe I could learn something in the books and apply that to help me navigate and have, successful, positive relationships. So those books. On the book on Children and Dying, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and that allowed me. That was a key reading that book because the contents touched me. Because while I had to learn and understand the prison survival rules, the mores, the customs, what I was expected to do, I never internalized those values as my own. And that
Yeah.
book allowed me to maintain, touch with my humanity in that way.
Yeah. It's crazy to think, right? One moment you're in high school, the next moment you're in prison, 15 to life.
Right.
Absolutely crazy, right? So,
Yes.
walk us through that moment, right? Because this is a question that I was going to bring up earlier, right?
Yes.
The DNA they have, right? What's going on with that? Where is that at?
So one of my letters hit a mark in the end. I wrote a book author and care the publishing company. I had gotten her contact info from a book that had many addresses in it. So the book author had been a warden of a men's maximum security prison. So I thought, well, you're likely in your walk of life to have come across somebody that could help me, or maybe you might in the future. So
Yeah.
I wrote that author, but someone in the publishing company instead forwarded the letter to an investigator named Claudia Whitman. When I sent Miss Whitman the DNA test results, she was instantly convinced of my innocence. She had never before saw a case where there was a DNA exclusion and yet a conviction. So she told me, write the Innocence Project. She lobbied them to take my case. She got other respected legal professionals to write letters to them. Then I got lucky that someone inside the Innocence Project, one of the caseworkers, who was not a lawyer, when the lawyers didn't want to take my case, and they didn't want to take it because they wanted the DNA to be something new, that it hadn't been presented already, which, if you recall, had already been excluded, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So they didn't want to take it, but the intake worker brought it back up a second time. And when they rejected it again, she brought it up a third time, this time getting it across with an idea I'd suggested. What about the DNA data bank? So getting their representation was the first key. Second key, Pirro left office and her successor was willing to let me get further testing that Pirro wouldn't. And the third key, we got lucky that the DNA, which didn't match me, when we put it in the database, it matched the actual perpetrator whose DNA was only there because left free while I was doing time for his crime. He killed a second victim 3.5 years later after killing the victim in my case. Confronted with that evidence, he admits he's the person who committed the crime. So my conviction's overturned September 20th, 2006. I go back to court November 2nd, at which point all charges are dismissed on actual innocence grounds. He was subsequently arrested, convicted, and was sentenced, pled guilty and was sentenced for the.
So where was he at the time, when they arrest him? He's not in prison?
He is in prison.
Oh,
He
okay,
ki-
he's in
he
prison for the
killed his
second
girlfriend's.
murder?
Yeah, right. He killed his girlfriend's sister. He strangled her to death when she walked in on him when he was inside of her house, stealing her VCR, so that he could then buy drugs. And she wouldn't agree to give him the VCR. So his answer to that was to strangle her to
Was
death.
the killer.
Yeah.
Jeez. So you said you go to court, you get, everything's done. So after walking free in 2006, what was your biggest fear about re-entering society?
I didn't really have a fear because that's just something in the mind ahead of time. It's instead that I suddenly encountered all these obstacles that never crossed my mind before while
Yeah.
I was fighting for freedom. Firstly, psychological after effects, having PTSD, panic attacks, anxiety. I felt like I'd been frozen in time. So I was released when I was 32, but I felt like I was 17 because that's the year
Again.
that I was when I was last free. And I felt like I was processing things at a slower speed than everyone else. I felt fear on seeing law enforcement.
Yeah.
Technology was different. GPS, cell phones, internet hadn't been created. Culture was different. The physical appearance of cities and towns looked different. So those three elements, the culture, the technology, and the physical appearance of cities and towns made it feel like I was in a parallel universe, a parallel world where I didn't belong. It was awkward when I would meet up with members of my extended family because the overwhelming majority of them never came to see me. The few that did, very sporadic and often 3 or 4 years in between. So I had to deal with that. There was the stigma. Very few people questioned my innocence. A few did, but most didn't, because even law enforcement was saying I'm innocent because they have to, because they're saying the other guy is guilty.
Yeah.
So the majority of the issue was that, yeah, you were in prison wrongfully for 16 years, sure, but you were there for 16 years. So how much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? So definitely a
Yeah, yeah.
significant obstacle with respect to personal relationships. I was always passed over for gainful employment. It seemed like all the would-be employers, they all wanted somebody that could hit the ground running, which was not something I could do. I would have required some patience and on-the-job training. Some people were worried, well, are people going to start protesting outside my store? What happens if my other employees walk off? I can run my business without you, but I can't run it without them. So those were some of the challenges. So I did catch on as a weekly columnist, but they only wanted one article a week. I was doing professional speaking, had a manager, but you only get paid if you get booked. So I didn't have very much income coming in. And as a result of that, I bounced from place to place. I didn't have stability of housing. At one point, I was a couple of weeks away from a homeless shelter. I also had the other challenges that you know I hadn't had a driver's license before. I had never lived alone. I had never went shopping. I never wrote a check. I never had to write a budget. I mean, balance a budget. Excuse me. So all those things added to the difficulties. Those were all challenges that I encountered. But at the
Yeah, and
same
it's not
time,
like it's not like the justice system, gives you reentry. It's not like they give you classes. It's not like they give you anything, right?
no, they don't. They give you nothing. They release you with nothing. I was able to sue, but that took 5 years before I got anything.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah, and we're gonna
found
get into that in
myself,
a few, we're gonna get into that in a few about
sure.
that.
But let me just
So
briefly say that I kind of found
yeah,
myself, though, at the same difficult time period. I kind of found myself also even while having those difficulties, because I was speaking, I was writing, I was meeting with elected officials, and then I was trading privacy for awareness by doing television, radio, ultimately new media interviews. I got given a scholarship from Mercy College to finish the bachelor's because I got the GED associates and another year towards the bachelor's while in prison before funding was cut. So they gave me the scholarship, and when I lost my housing, they allowed me to live on campus. So I avoided the homeless shelter that way, and they gave me a meal plan, so I was able to eat.
so Mercyhurst, you said.
Mercy University at that time, Mercy College.
Mercy College, okay. So, you get to that point. How did you channel that pain, right, into earning your law degree? Were there any professors or mentors, who stuck with you and changed the game and helped you out?
Yeah, definitely. Before I did that, I tried to get into law school. I wasn't successful. I didn't score well enough on the LSAT. So I figured, well, there really wasn't much of a job market for me, even with the bachelor's degree, given my lack of work history. So I decided, rather than just pursue these dead end jobs, let me get a master's in criminal justice, see what the job
Yeah,
market's like after that. I think the degree, the extra credential will make a difference. I get compensated, and then we start the foundation, which to free people and to do the policy work. We helped to free 15 people, helped to pass 9 laws. But this ties into law school, the question you asked, because at some point I became not satisfied with sitting in the front row. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table, represent some of the clients, make some of the arguments. Hence, going to law school and pursue the dream of freeing others as a lawyer, and then I became a lawyer.
yeah. That's awesome. So, then you sued, right? And you won millions, but it was
Did.
capped at 10 million. Is
Yes,
that true?
the jury verdict wa okay, so well, this is all public record, so it's fine. So I
Yeah.
brought a compensation I brought through a civil rights law firm. They filed a compensation claim under New York State law. That was, we settled after 5 years, that was for 185 at that point, which
Oh,
most people's awards were only getting 2 million, so I'm only 150 off without having to litigate it, so that made sense, and I needed money.
yeah.
Now, then there's the federal civil rights lawsuit. One of the defendants, one of the defendants was Westchester County because it was their medical examiner. So they paid. So I'm going to keep saying they paid. Okay, not to be
Yeah.
confused with I received, because you have to
Yeah.
pay the lawyers a third. You have to pay the expenses. So in reality, you keep 55 to 60%, just for informational purposes. All right. So Westchester County settled. They paid 6.5 because of the fraud of their medical examiner. Westchester County Legal Aid, it was their lawyers who did the legal malpractice. So they settled for 6 figures. I can't specify the figure by terms of the settlement. I settled with city of Peekskill. That was for 5-3 because that was their officers who coerced a false confession and did not document witness interviews. I went to trial with Putnam County because that was the polygraphist,
Graph,
and
yeah.
there was a high-low agreement. If I but they didn't want me to bankrupt them, so they wanted me to guarantee they wouldn't have to pay over a certain amount, which I was willing to give them that guarantee if they guaranteed that no matter what, they wouldn't pay less than a floor. So the
Yeah.
purpose of the trial was to determine which figure they were going to pay. So I won the trial. I wish I got $40 million that the jury awarded 41 million. But the deal was if I won, they'd have to pay the 10. But
They'd
I
have to
don't
pay the
regret it because that would have been greatly reduced anyway by the judge. Then they would have appealed it. And, I feel good with that decision that I made. So I don't regret it.
Yeah. So, in a bipartisan world, right? How can red and blue states unite on wrongful conviction reform?
By recognizing that wrongful conviction is not a partisan issue. Okay. It does not belong to the Dems. Okay. It is bipartisan. It's a human rights issue. Okay. While people can disagree on broader criminal justice reform, I think one thing that everybody can agree on is that innocent people should not be found guilty and sent to prison. So some common sense reforms backed by social science would be videotaping interrogations from beginning to end, with the camera focusing on both the person being questioned and the interrogator. Okay, that would be clear. Is somebody threatened? Are they given false promises? Are they given details? Or do they instead, or do they really have guilty knowledge? It would protect honest cops from false allegations of coercion, and it would make for better evidence. So that other measures that address false confessions, which have caused wrongful convictions in 29% of the DNA proven wrongful convictions, a police deception bill. So I think that police should not be allowed to lie to suspects in interrogations because that's inherently coercive. Youth Interrogation Act, which, if passed, is a provision that states that 17-year-olds and kids younger would have to speak to a lawyer for that lawyer to explain their rights to them so that they could then decide if they want to waive them or not.
Okay.
Reflecting back on myself, I never understood what it meant to, I never understood my rights. I never understood what it meant to waive them. Whenever they read anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, my mind went to what I saw on television, different civil court contexts. And I remember thinking to myself, court, what are you talking about? We're not going to court.
Yeah, yeah.
Having identification reform, there are best practices as established by research that can make that identification process more reliable. That's has caused wrongful convictions in 71% of the DNA proven wrongful convictions. Having a better system of public defense, bad lawyering is a major factor. So if we had one statewide system that would allow for oversight, quality control, we should limit the caseloads. It's not unusual for one public defender to represent 100 people. There should be an even playing field in terms of financial resources and manpower and experts and investigators, as opposed to the big disparity that there is now between the district attorney's office, public defender's office, commission on prosecutor conduct. So we helped pass a landmark bill on that in New York. So it's an independent oversight board that can investigate allegations of prosecutorial misconduct. Prosecutorial misconduct is a major factor in wrongful conviction cases. It runs through many of them. And if you had a commission, not only would there be a place for victims of misconduct to go for redress, but the hope is that it would be a deterrent to prosecutors from committing misconduct in the first place. We need to have standardized evidence preservation. I mean, if a case is even within that 10% that even has something to test, the next thing is the evidence lost or destroyed? If either of those have happened, the defendant would just be stuck in prison. I do advocate for an automatic reversal rule. If someone's been convicted with the use of junk science, then they should get an automatic new trial where that junk science will not be allowed as evidence. I mean, things that sound scientific that got used for decades in court. Things like tire tracks, footprints, bite marks. It sounds scientific, but it's not. The reason why it's not, there are no studies, there's no error, there's no data, there's no error rates. We don't know what the error rate is or exactly how many vehicles could actually be capable of those tire tracks. Bullet
Tracks,
lead
yeah.
analysis, where we're going to pretend, well, chemical composition of the bullets can be traced back to the manufacturer and where they were distributed out to the stores that sell them. my personal favorite dog scent testimony, where we're going to give the dog an item from a victim from a crime scene and an item from the suspect. And if the dog barks, that means the dog recognized the smell, which
Yeah,
would be laughable, except that people have been convicted on that. And they're
on
still,
that. Yeah.
I mean, even, fingerprints where there is no agreed upon standard across the board where it has to have a certain number of matches in order to
Matches.
constitute
Yeah,
a
yeah.
match.
Especially
Yeah.
DNA.
So
You got touch DNA too, which is tough. You know.
yeah, right. But there's error tables and there's studies and the statistics are, like billions and trillions. And that's the gold standard. So it's bizarre that we can recognize as a society that these are junk sciences, but yet people who are convicted based in part on that are not able to get new trials
New
to
trials.
then,
Yeah.
to have the trial without that evidence in it. It really, I think all those things should be bipartisan. I think it should be bipartisan that there should be compensation. So there are currently 9 states, including Pennsylvania, where myself and my colleagues and the Pennsylvania chapter, if it could happen to you, a statewide coalition group, which I'm an advisory board member of, foundation's part of, we're working at passing compensation. They're one of 9 states that don't compensate. And the question is
Okay.
simple. If you've lost your liberty through a wrongful conviction, then should the state compensate somebody? Not just for the pain and suffering, but for the lost wages, impacted future wages and bills in the future as far as, mental health treatment. So that's a human rights issue. I think that Republicans and Democrats should agree on that, but we really don't see that happening. And honestly, it's frustrating because we've been at it for 5 or 6 years, bringing Pennsylvania exonerees to the legislature, my leadership and some of my colleagues and other leaders throughout Pennsylvania, and we can't get this bill passed.
It's crazy. Crazy. So Jeff, what's the most common myth about exonerees that you hear on speaking to us?
That all right, so Ty, everybody in prison claims that they're innocent,
Yeah.
right? And another belief. Well, if you didn't do that, you didn't do that, but you did something. So those are amongst the biggest myths. And another myth another myth is that when you're exonerated, that compensation is automatic, instantaneous, and millions of dollars. And another myth is that if a wrongful conviction was caused, at least in part, by prosecutorial misconduct, that the prosecutors would face serious professional consequences, as well as potentially losing their license and being able
License.
to be sued, whereas they have immunity, so they can't be sued. They rarely face any professional consequences. So,
Yeah.
a lot of people even think, well, that should be criminal. If a prosecutor intentionally withholds evidence of innocence, that's criminal, but they're not prosecuted, although they should be. So I think those are myths that I often hear on the speaking circuit.
On the speaking to us. So, okay, a couple more questions before we end, Jeff. So
Sure.
if you could confront the prosecutors who blocked your DNA tests, like Janine Pirro's office, what would you say?
I would ask them, well, why did you block the testing? The excuse you've given in the media that you weren't the DA when I was convicted. All right, fair enough, you weren't. Are you trying to say to me you have no culpability whatsoever for you keeping the ball rolling against me, that you took office before my first appeal? You fought all 7 of my appeals. Why did your prosecutors fight my appeals knowing the DNA didn't match me? You know what that meant. Why did you block me from getting further testing when you agreed to an unrelated Westchester County exoneration based on a DNA exclusion? I wrote your office in reference to that and said, well, what about this old case that's in your file where the DNA excludes me also? This other position that you've articulated, your spokespeople, no new evidence was presented to me when I was, yeah, okay, fine. There was no new evidence presented to you. There was no new evidence presented to your successor either, but she allowed me to get the testing and I got exonerated. My nightmare could have been ended. So in light of all of that, what is your reason other than you regurgitating what I've already rebutted? Why did you not do it? What is there to lose? Either it would have confirmed my guilt, right? Which you were saying all along, in which case we need not talk about guilt or innocence anymore after that, or it's going to show my innocence and I can regain my freedom and you guys can refocus your investigation and try to find the actual perpetrator to get some justice for the victim. So really, this was a no
Exactly.
lose. What was there to lose by doing the
Yeah.
further testing?
Yeah. Well, because they had the man that did it, they claim. They had the bad man, and the case was solved. And like you said, it doesn't happen in Peekskill. So, they had the bad man away, that the community could breathe a little easier. But yet did they know for 16 years that guy was out there, out there. Who knows
Well,
how
he
many
was well,
people he
he
killed?
was out for 3.5 more years.
Oh,
Then
three
he
and a
got
half more years.
arrested.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But as a result of that, another person lost their life. The community thought it was safe. It wasn't safe.
And
He
it
was still
wasn't
there,
safe.
and
Yeah.
another person lost their life. So look, my position is this. I think from a moral point of view, I'll go to my grave on the idea that the blood of that second victim is on the hands of the police that did what they did to me. Same thing on the prosecutors, because if they had done their job right, they could have apprehended the actual perpetrator, and that school teacher who had two children, Patricia Morrison, she did not have to lose her life. Her
Life.
kids
You know,
didn't have to, lose their mother like
if
that.
the police just did their due diligence,
If the
you
police
know?
just did their due diligence, yeah.
So, Jeff, for young listeners facing injustice, what's your one rallying cry for them?
Never give up. But I want to add a couple of other pieces around it. So,
Yeah.
firstly, if the police want to speak to you, you give your name and your pedigree information, your name and where you live. And the next thing is you want a lawyer. Say it unambiguously. Just say, I want a lawyer. Do not come down off that. Do not say anything other than that. Don't let them talk you out of it. The innocence of suspects works against them. They think, well, if I haven't done anything, why shouldn't I speak to the police? What could possibly happen? But actually, as you hear from me, quite a bit can actually happen.
Happen.
People get worried, well, I'm going to look guilty. Look, it doesn't matter if you look guilty. Get the lawyer. The lawyer will level the playing field, and things can continue at that point. So I would say that. And if you're charged with a crime that you haven't committed, be proactive. You should be all over your lawyer. How are you going to defend me? What's your strategy? I've told you about these other witnesses. Did you go and speak to them? See, I didn't do that. Okay, I told him about my alibi, and I left it at that. I trusted him. And that
Yeah.
was a mistake. So I would say to people to be proactive about it. And then if you are wrongfully convicted, look, put together a short letter. My name is so and so. I've been wrongfully convicted of. I'm innocent. The evidence against me was XYZ. The flaw in that evidence was 1, 2, 3. Here are a couple of directions to go in where we might be able to find some new evidence of my innocence. Reason why I'm writing you is because I don't have money to hire an attorney. Neither does my family. I'm hoping you'll take my case pro bono. I have the documents to support what I'm saying. I'm not sending it to you now because I'm respecting your time. I'm going to wait for you to get back to me. So people think that the more they write, the more likely it is that people will take their case. But it's actually the opposite. The more you write, the less likely that anyone's going to read it. The more you're going to make people want to crinkle it up and throw it out.
Throw it away. Yeah.
You're not trying to hit a home run, okay? No one's going to take your case off one letter. The only thing you want to do in that first letter is you want to make somebody think, well, yeah, if what Jimmy just told me is true, then yes, I
Yeah.
could see how they might be innocent. I'm a little bit more curious. Let me look into this a little bit more, because I don't feel like I'm going to be overwhelmed because he wrote too much and sent me reams and reams and reams of legal paperwork, most of which is miscellaneous and not going to be relevant anymore anyway.
In the case.
So
Yeah.
that would be the piece of advice that do what I did. Stay out of the prison politics. Don't waste your time in programs that you don't need to have recreation, or you're going to go to the to the gym. You're going to work out all day. You're going to be a porter, i.e. a janitor. Take programs that have some kind of potential benefit if and when you touch down, you go back home. Expand your mind, read nonfiction books, study the law, collect articles of other people who were exonerated, and just never quit. Don't quit. Same
Jeff,
thing I did. What
I
I
appre-
did is very much replicable. And then when you come home, okay, don't forget about the other people that you left behind.
behind you. No, Jeff. So you've turned unimaginable suffering into a symphony of justice, a beacon for the voiceless. proving that from the depths of despair rises the mightiest warriors. Your story isn't just history, it's a thunderclap calling us all to action, to question, to fight, to reform a system that too often devours the innocent. Reach out to Jeffrey and support his vital work through his website at jeffreydeskovic.com or the Deskovic Foundation for Justice at deskovicfoundation.org.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. www.deskovic.org. If imagine if we had 25,000 people who were willing to sacrifice $3 to $5 a month on a recurring basis, which they could do through our
Exactly.
Patreon page. That would give us close to $1 million. If we could help free 15 people on a shoestring budget, have nine active cases that we're really working on out of the 13, we would be able to hire additional lawyers, paralegals, investigators, other essential personnel. We could work on those other 4 cases. We could work on freeing even more people. My ultimate
More
dream,
people.
Jimmy, is to have a chapter of the Deskovic Foundation in each state, ultimately in each country. That'll be when we get the public support to do that.
To fund it, yeah. So let's amplify his to every listener battling your own storms. Remember Jeffrey's fire. Let it ignite yours. Subscribe, share this episode, and join the movement for truth. This is Uncle Jimmy's podcast signing off. Stay resilient, stay righteous, and keep pushing for a better tomorrow. God bless you all. Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate you coming on, joining the show, and also letting the world know that there are innocent people behind bars, serving time. This is a story right here. For you guys that don't believe it, that the justice system, everyone's guilty that's in prison. Here's Jeff right here. 16 years, 16-year-old kid. He started this journey. 17, he gets put away, 15 to life. But through his hard work and diligence and in his head, knowing that he did not do this, he fought and fought and fought until he finally got that chance. He was excluded. The DNA wasn't him. They found out who did it. It was a man who had already committed murder number 2. He was in prison. He went away. And who knows if that man that committed the 2 murders murdered anyone else? We don't know that, Jeff.
We don't know that. We do not
We
know
don't know
that.
that. And I just want to say thank you for coming on, and I appreciate it. Peace and love. Peace and love. Uncle Jimmy out.
Peace and love.